is Sam Broker, and welcome to my TED Talk. I want you to all think for a second about storytelling, but that's pretty broad, so let's narrow it down. I want you to think about one specific story, The Lord of the Rings. Even if you haven't read The Lord of the Rings or watched any of the movies, I'm assuming that most everyone here has at least heard of it. And that's because it's incredibly famous. And one of the reasons it's incredibly famous is because it's been adapted into so many mediums. It's not just a book series, it's also a film series, a musical, an audio drama, a tabletop role-playing game, an animated film, and a video game. A lot of video games, actually. There's a lot of them. Because people kept finding new ways to take this story that they loved and adapt it into new mediums and change it. Because people love adapting things, and as technology has progressed, especially in the past century and a half, we've been able to create new mediums and ways to tell stories. Thinking about this overall broadness of storytelling, how much storytelling is I can't remember how to say that word. How much is encompassed in storytelling, and how it's followed humans throughout history, and how we're so obsessed with it, made me ask the question, how has modern technology changed fictional storytelling methods and its impacts? So storytelling is fascinating because we are never satisfied with it. We've never been satisfied with the stories that we have, and if we were, then we wouldn't be creating new stories, and we've never been satisfied with the ways that we can tell these stories. We weren't satisfied when we just had oral storytelling. We weren't satisfied when we could draw pictures to tell stories, and we weren't even satisfied when the written word was created and we could tell stories through that. Instead, we've changed technology in order for us to be able to tell our stories. And we always need more, and we've been doing this for longer than humanity can remember. And I think that's just kind of crazy. So as technology grows, the stories that we can tell grow, and how we can tell them grows. And so I decided to focus on what I see as the big four of modern storytelling, which is live action, animation, audio drama, and video games. These each use pretty modern technology, all invented in the last century and a half, to tell a story. So let's jump into it. I researched the history of each of these mediums and what makes them each unique and how they are able to create and tell stories and adapt old stories and tell them in a new way. And it was kind of hard to find research on this because turns out that the academic forefront of research is not how different mediums affect each other and how they differ from each other in storytelling. Apparently my obsession is more of just a me thing and not an everyone thing, which I think kind of sucks. So I hope by the end of this, all of you can have a bit more of an obsession with storytelling. So each of these mediums, live action, animation, audio drama, and video games, have their own unique characteristics that set them both apart from each other as technology-based ways to tell stories and from more traditional mediums. You might notice that 3 out of 4 of these mediums, live action, animation, and video games, are all very visual mediums. Specifically, technology-based visual mediums are able to tell stories. Using different angles and things like camera angles and forced perspective in order to make the audience feel a certain way. Things like books and audio dramas that are non-visual mediums are able to tell you what the environment looks like, but they are not in control of exactly what the audience is seeing in their head. One way that visual mediums is able to tell a story is through environmental storytelling. Oh, come back here, thank you. So you may be thinking, why is there a messy room up here? That's not my room, surprisingly, though my room is messy, but this is a way to tell environmental storytelling. Instead of a movie or something specifically telling you this character is messy, they can instead show you with how messy their room is or how cluttered their desk is at work where they can barely fit anything on it. So a way to imagine this is to imagine your own room. Imagine somebody you don't know walking in there. What would they be able to tell about you? Do you share a room or have your own? Do you have a dog bed in the corner? Do you have pictures of friends and families up on the wall? For me personally, I have posters up on my wall of things I like. I have a box of D&D dice on my shelf. I have clothes strewn about, kind of like that. And my bed is unmade, also like that. But so somebody can walk in there and instantly be able to tell more about me as a person based on kind of just my environment. And there's other ways that visual mediums can tell stories in a way that non-visual mediums can't. For example, jump scares in horror movies. Imagine watching a horror movie. There's a crashing noise in the other room. The actor gets up and turns a corner, and the music starts to build. They walk into the room, and there's a broken vase on the floor. Cuts back to the actor as they lean over to pick it up, and the music is building and building, and your heart rate is building and building as well, because you know what's about to happen. And then the actor gets up and boom, a jump scare. And books can't do that. If they could, that would be kind of weird. But but they have to tell horror stories specifically to use other techniques to get the fear across. And so visual mediums, specifically technology-based visual mediums, and more traditional mediums and non-visual mediums differ in this way. I'm not switching there yet. Live action. Live action uses real subjects to tell a story. And that use of real actors has a great benefit. It helps us connect with the characters and the actors better because they're real people, and that helps us create more feelings of like real connection. So, and this has been found in studies to help, especially in small children, create a sense of empathy. And it can help train people to be more empathetic because we learn by watching people. And our brains, because storytelling and movies are just something kind of made up, can't necessarily always tell the difference between real and not. So we can still learn from movies. And that is taking the extra step with live action because it feels more real. However, that use of real people in the real world can also have its downsides. Things like CGI can cost millions of dollars to make a movie like Marvel because they're trying to break the laws of physics in the real world. However, things like animation are able to break the laws of physics however they please, and they do that constantly. Talking animals and weird superpowers and proportions that don't exactly make sense. And for example, Into the Spider-Verse. It's quite famous for its animation, and animation doesn't have to be bound by the laws of physics. The New York skyline in Into the Spider-Verse, the creators said they treated it as if it was its own character and its own person, and they did that with all the parts of New York. All the backgrounds were their own people who could be changed and had personalities and didn't necessarily, like all the characters, follow the rules of physics. Some of the buildings in the New York skyline were proportionally miles tall and could never exist in real life, but when you're watching it from the controlled angle, it looks really good and it makes you feel a certain way. For this shot, where Miles Morales is falling, and it's probably the most iconic shot in the entire movie, that is what the skyline looked like. It was weird and wonky and put on a weird angle, but we can't see that. We can just see exactly what the creators want us to see because animators can control every single pixel on a frame. And so animation gives people more control like that. And the fact that they can bend physics in this way to help you create certain ways and create senses of emptiness or vastness or scale in ways that real life can actually help with the overall emergence people feel into stories. It has this benefit over live action where in live action you can't necessarily have the same control. A study found that when they compared live action and animated scenes that were almost exactly the same besides how they were made, the people who saw the animated scenes were more narratively transported, or in other words, they were more lost in the story. Meanwhile, with live action, they were less lost in it because it was the real world. So what about video games and audio dramas? Well, video games immediately have something that completely sets them apart from other forms of media, and that's that they're interactive. You're able to touch and feel in the controller, and you're able to move the character, and you're able to select dialogue options and make story choices. And while the story isn't always necessarily reliant on the player controlling it, it often creates a more embedded sense for the person to be able to be part of that story and interactive. And no other medium really has this level of interactivity. There are things like choose your own adventure books. However, in those, you're selecting a very limited choice of options. You could probably see all the options in one day. Instead, like in a video game where you take hours and hours building up to something often, and also and also you yourself are the character. Instead of reading about the character, you're making them move, you're making them talk, or you're making them fight. And this also adds levels of difficulty, which is something other mediums don't have and can make that medium more engaging for people. Instead of just watching a movie, you're struggling and you're playing and you're sometimes getting pretty frustrated. But it creates this like sense of fun and connection that people love. And so what about audio dramas? Well, audio dramas are easily the least well known of the four mediums I'm talking about. And so a brief description of them is that they're also called radio plays or radio theater, and they're kind of like watching a movie with your eyes closed. They use character dialogue and sound effects to tell a story rather than telling you what everything's like in a book, or showing you what everything's like in a movie. An example is if two characters are walking in a forest. In a film, they'll just show you that. In audio dramas, you might hear the crunch of snow beneath the characters' feet as they talk, and they might mention snow or how pretty the forest is. And because when I've explained this to people before, they've still been kind of confused exactly what that means, I decided to get like a quick clip from an audio drama that just shows how it uses both dialogue and sound effects to kind of create the scene.
There must be processes. You need your team.
We're not waking him up, Gordon.
We're not?
He's very dead.
But you'll be exposing him to the elements. You'll compromise his kinesthetic field. Or not. That's fine, I suppose.
So rather than telling you, oh, this person opened the cryopod and stuff, it just let you hear that and let you hear the character's reaction to that. A lot of people see the lack of visuals in audio dramas as a downside, though personally, I see it as something that makes it really cool, and it's actually my favorite medium to consume stories in. It's great for when you're doing other things or don't want to sit in front of a screen all day or are multitasking, and it also has the effect of letting you imagine, like a book does. While films might take away a large part of that creativity that comes in consuming stories, audio dramas let you envision your surroundings like a book, but it still has the benefits of kind of being easier to consume and also having the benefit of actors. And also for people who don't like long paragraphs of narration, they don't usually do that. There's a couple that will find ways to have narration and make it make sense. However, most of them, it's just you're listening to those voices and those sound cues and picking up context. So, it doesn't want to go. There we go. So this brings me back to my question. How has modern technology changed fictional storytelling methods and its impacts? Well, I already answered the first part. It changed fictional storytelling by creating new ways to tell stories. But what about all the impacts that this can have? Well, adaptations are often seen in things as not as good, but adaptations are a really good example of how we like to take stories and tell them in a new light. And that can impact the story. The overall experience of playing Super Mario Bros. Or watching the new Super Mario Bros. Movies is completely different, and the story is different, and the characters are different, because they're made to better fit the medium and their new audience. And with this, there are also stories that can be told in a wide variety of medias, but there are some that are made specifically for that media, and therefore, if that medium didn't exist, these stories wouldn't exist. A good example of this is A Comedy of Danger. The first ever audio drama was made to make you have a connection with the audience because you couldn't see, and neither could the characters. It was in a coal mine that got blacked out and the lights were out, and the story was them searching for a way out. So it impacted its audience in this way because you felt a different connection. You were able to connect with the characters because you related to them in that moment. And each medium has this different ways. For example, in video games, there are stories like Life is Strange. Life is Strange is a video game where your choices are heavily reliant on what makes the story. And you can play the game over and over again and discover new parts of the world and a new side of the story and completely view everything differently. And if that was made into a film or an animation, that core aspect of the story would be taken away. So it has this different impact because every time you play it, you get a new side of the story, you experience something new, and that makes it more interesting. Another impact that they can have is accessibility. For people who might have a harder time reading, all of these are kind of good. And for things such as people with visual impairments, there's been research into using audio dramas to remake a show instead of just having audio description play over it to make it better and more entertaining for people with visual impairments and let them explore fictional stories in a different way. So that brings me to the end. With new technology growing, we've had new mediums grow as well, and new stories created specifically because these mediums exist that would have never existed if these mediums didn't exist. And we can expect to see that in the future. New mediums will be invented because we're obsessed with it. And so there will be stories that could have never existed in our time because simply the way to tell them didn't exist yet. And so next time you're reading a book or watching a show, maybe think about it for a second. Think about how you're engaging in humanity's oldest obsession with telling stories, and how you're in a unique time for storytelling because every time is different in storytelling. And so you're experiencing something that 100 years ago would have never been experienced, and in 100 years won't be experienced again. And that's kind of what makes storytelling fascinating. So read a book, watch a movie, play a game, and remember, you're a human, and a human is an author and an audience.